Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. I am your host Pushpendra Mehta. Joining me today are Paul Galloway, Senior Director Advisory Services at Strategic Treasurer, and Ben Poole, Writer at CTMfile. Welcome to this episode of the Open Treasury podcast, Paul and Ben.
Thanks, Push.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspectives with us on topics that impact the world of cash and treasury management. In today's episode, we shall discuss 4 topics, namely the key geopolitical risks that are expected to remain concerns for corporate treasury in 2024. ChatGPT can help predict future interest rate decisions. Migros upgrades to Ion's new Wallstreet suite solution. And finally, GTreasury integrates with PNC Bank for instant data connectivity. Our audience can read articles, interviews, and industry roundups by visiting ctmfile.com or by following the links in our show notes. Let's commence today's discussion with the first story, which is about the key geopolitical risks that are expected to remain concerns for corporate treasury in 2024. The cumulative impact of 5 years of the US-China trade war, over 20 months of combat between Russian and Ukrainian armed forces, and the intensifying Israel-Palestine military clash has heightened geopolitical risk and thrust it into the center of corporate treasury discourse. According to KPMG's 2023 CEO Outlook survey, CEOs now rank geopolitics and political uncertainty as the greatest risk to the growth of their business, be it navigating a company's presence in a conflict zone or attempting to navigate disrupted supply chains and manage price fluctuations. The key geopolitical risks that are likely to linger and become pivotal concerns for corporate finance leaders and treasurers through 2024 are trade tensions, armed conflicts, a major terror attack, balkanization of technology to control digital sovereignty, and a rise in AI-powered cyber attacks. Paul, of all the geopolitical risks that global corporations have to navigate over the next year, which would you advise corporate treasury and finance professionals to be most watchful of?
Yeah, that's a great question, Push. When I think about what we're facing today and what the next 12 months look like, or just take it out maybe 14 months to the end of 2024, I think what you're going to find is that there's going to be elevated costs of capital in play. One thing that's been a little interesting out there, in particular in the US, is that spreads have not trended the way that you might have expected, meaning that high yield or even corporate spreads have not moved at quite the pace you would think relative to the risks that's out there. It feels like there's still some movement for pricing in risk, and perhaps some folks are out there expecting that some of this will wane given the activity that the Fed is engaged in. But the problem is that we have uncontrollables out there. We can't control Russia and Ukraine to the extent that we can stop it today. We can sanction them. We have. We can do other things to prevent them or give them thought for pause. Obviously, that hasn't worked. The Middle East is heating up. This is becoming more and more serious every day. What's started as a conflict between Israel and Hamas has started streaming across into other militant organizations. Hezbollah and others are starting to engage in activity that is giving a sense that this could spill over into a broader conflict within the Middle East. There's been attacks. They've been very pointed within Syria and Lebanon. An Iran-backed terrorist group has launched missiles at Israel. I read out there somewhere that Saudi Arabia had shot these missiles down, but I don't think all of them were shot down. I think some of them may have made their targets. So now we've got a broader chance of a spread in risk. Well, there's a lot of oil activity in the Middle East. And so we already have issues with supply chain globally. And I think this just puts more emphasis on the ability to manage your supply chain and to manage your cash. Your cost of capital is becoming more and more important. And as this article points out, there's a lot of interconnectedness across the globe. Many organizations today have a global footprint. You go back 50 plus years ago, it wasn't as robust as that. And today it's much more robust. The use of technology across the global footprint has increased. And so you talked about earlier, or touched on the use of technology, the risk associated with the use of technology, cyber attacks that can lock up infrastructure, steal money from corporate treasurers. I think that this is going to continue to increase in scope and velocity. So I think we're going to see a rapid increase in these types of attacks. Technology is definitely one of those things that treasurers got to consider as part of the risk mitigation. So supply chain, borrowing costs, access to capital, protection of capital or cash. So it's technology, risk management. I think the cybersecurity, I think this is just going to become more and more important for treasurers to consider, especially around the use of AI. AI has just exploded, and we're going to see and have seen that the fraudsters out there, people that want to wreak havoc or cause chaos, are going to utilize this technology, or at least attempt to utilize this technology to disrupt and steal from corporations. Disruption could come in not only just disrupting a corporation, but disruption of infrastructure. The ability of some of these criminals out there to gain access to infrastructure has been proven out there. We could have a heightened risk of attacks on infrastructure. Lots of things happening. Our treasurers need to get up to speed on what those risks are. So they need to do the assessment, determine what those risks are, put together a plan to mitigate the risks if they don't already have one in place, and then they're going to need to execute on it. And they're going to have to stay vigilant. So they're going to have to keep up to speed. They're going to have to continue to keep their knowledge up to speed as things advance forward, because if they don't, they could be vulnerable to an attack, which means that will cost them in terms of capital, cash, and time.
Yeah, I completely agree with Paul about how heightened geopolitical risks can impact the likes of availability of credit, FX risk management, commodity prices, all those sorts of things. I think at the end of the day, a lot of managing geopolitical risk comes down to core treasury fundamentals. So transparency of the firm's global liquidity position from accurate and up-to-date cash flow forecasting is essential. Scenario analysis can help treasurers be prepared for these sudden eventualities. What would happen if your company could suddenly no longer operate in country X, Y, or Z, for example? So it's about building these contingencies in for cash flow, for payments, for trade transactions, everything really. And beyond that, also having a crisis management plan. So what happens if there's an event that isn't covered by your contingency plans? That's kind of another line of defense for treasurers to think about.
Paul and Ben, you made some very valid remarks. Let's now shift the conversation to our next topic, which is about ChatGPT and how it can help predict future interest rate decisions. An academic study has demonstrated the ability of large language models like ChatGPT to predict future interest rate decisions by central banks. The study, conducted by researchers from Sheffield Business School at Sheffield Hallam University, analyzed speeches from Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee members before interest rate voting decisions. Ben, ChatGPT can answer questions, provide information, augment research, assist with various tasks. And now we are told it can also help predict future interest rate decisions. Given that you covered this story for CTMfile, can you enlighten our Treasury audience by sharing some findings of this study that you think will be of interest to Treasury professionals, given its potential impact on financial decision making?
The robots know what we're thinking before we've done it ourselves. Certainly, I think, for markets that have misread the likes of the Fed and the Bank of England and where they might go in their hiking cycles, this type of generative AI or Gen AI could start to bring in more accuracy. So, for example, earlier this year, markets were pricing in rate cuts from the Fed specifically for kind of around this point of the year. Obviously, those have been kicked further down the road as the months have rolled on, but perhaps Gen AI tools like ChatGPT could have got the market slightly more in sync with central bank thinking through this type of analysis. For corporates, I think it's a good example of how they might be able to use Gen AI to support economic analysis and decision making. This type of technology thrives on data and just how much data it can get its hands on, which is obviously something that Treasury departments have huge access to. There's a ton of data that flows in and out of Treasury departments every day. So training a large language model or Gen AI tool on the trove of data that Treasury absorbs could be a way of automating a level of decision making, or at least certain options that can then be presented to the treasurer in real time. So really kind of taking a lot of the manual work out of that side of things and presenting options and basically helping the treasurer become more strategic, which is obviously a journey that the role and the function of corporate treasury has been on for a few years now.
Yeah, Ben, I think that what this article here points out is that the use of artificial intelligence like ChatGPT can be very useful. And when we think about the data-centric society that we're becoming or have become, I think the use of technology like this is going to become more and more important, especially around the ability to trove mass quantities of data to determine anomalies and consistencies in what's being delivered. So it's kind of both sides. What is the data telling us? What is the data not telling us? I think that gives people, treasurers in particular, could utilize this. It could be really powerful as a tool for predicting cash flow activity in a way that we haven't been able to do today. We're getting better and better at it, but I think this is just another layer of utilizing data, or a platform to analyze data to make better decisions. So I think this just proves that the technology works and it can be useful. I think it's exciting to think about where this is going to go in the future. And I myself have been considering the use of technology like this in some of the work that I do. How can I utilize it? How can it help me be better at what I do? I think there is opportunity to use this across the Treasury platform. So I think it's something that as treasurers consider the use of technology like this, they've got to, one, educate themselves, two, understand risk mitigants and be able to communicate to the senior managers, okay, here's a tool we can utilize. Here's how we can utilize it. Here's the risks associated with it. Here's how we're going to manage those risks. Here's how we monitor and report on it. And deliver that kind of message to get support from senior managers to to incorporate this into the work they do. I think there'll be early adopters of doing this. I think there will be some that will sit on the sidelines until it's been proven further that it does work and they can see the outcomes. And then those that might be a little bit slower. But I think we'll see the use of technology like this within Treasury become more prevalent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you're right, it is going to get more prevalent. Moving forward to our next topic, which is about Migros upgrading to ION's new Wallstreet suite solution. Migros, Switzerland's largest retail company, supermarket chain, and private employer, has successfully upgraded to ION's new Wallstreet suite solution deployed in the ION cloud. Wallstreet Suite, an enterprise-level treasury management system, is designed to handle complex treasury needs while providing global visibility to cash, liquidity, and exposures. Its modular, service-oriented architecture aims to help finance teams achieve more through automation and exception management, making it possible to scale operations and bring greater visibility for the organization. Paul, if you were a corporate treasurer, what distinctive feature in ION's new Wallstreet Suite solution would make you want to adopt it?
Treasury platforms like ION's Wallstreet Suite, organizations have to look at what their needs are. So it's not one size fits all when I think about this. And so for some organizations, a platform like Wallstreet Suite works quite well. For others, they may need more or less. So it depends on the organization itself. So when people are considering treasury management systems like this, they need to consider what the needs are. Where are the gaps at? What might they need for the future? Do they need to grow into something over time, something that will grow with them, perhaps? So there's different approaches to determining what works for best for an organization. And obviously, this article points out for Migros that this platform works quite well for them. They need an enterprise level system. They need to be able to provide global visibility to their cash, manage their liquidity, understand their exposures, be able to monitor trading, be able to provide alerts. Not only does it do that, it also increases efficiencies through automation. And so there's some cost savings associated with it. Of course, there's costs associated with the platform, but the efficiency gains that they get from this and the ability to distribute reports, provide visibility, to manage things, to position, it's super valuable. And so it offsets that cost by quite a bit because it is so efficient and it does all these things for them. So I think this is just a nice article pointing out how a platform really works well for an organization. You know, a platform like ION's Wallstreet Suite really fits with this organization. It explains how it does. And so if I'm a treasurer at a company reading an article like this, I would glean off it, how this particular platform worked for them, what the results have been of the implementation of the platform. And this article points that out.
Yeah, it highlights the role that a TMS can play in a major corporation. I mean, companies of this size will likely have an ERP, quite often more than one ERP within the organization in their tech stack there. But often these can lack the very specific tools that treasurers need, or it'll have a basic module that doesn't help with the precise nature of a particular treasury requirement. So I thought that was quite interesting. And also in this story, Migros is migrating its TMS operations to the cloud within this upgrade. So obviously there's a cost benefit to using a system that's in the cloud rather than on-premises machines and having to look after the upkeep of those yourselves. And also these cloud providers will often make upgrades suggested by one corporate user available to all users, so kind of everyone can get the benefit. That tends to happen if the one corporate user making the request is quite a big corporate user. But it's just the way that I can kind of filter down to everyone that's using a system that's cloud-based. It's a bit like if you get an upgrade notification for an app on your phone, so you want to be on the latest version. So it's important that treasurers are in contact with their cloud TMS providers, if they have them, kind of anytime there's an upgrade like this, so they can stay up to speed with new functionalities that might get switched on along the way.
Yeah, Ben, I think you pointed out something that's really important to note about treasury management systems and kind of the advancement of how these platforms are deployed. Used to be that these platforms were hosted natively, within an organization. They hosted the system within their own systems, or they moved to a host-to-host connection with a provider. It evolved into software as a service or SaaS platform. So no longer was it host to host or was it hosted on site. So you could just go through a website. You could log into it. It would be encrypted. You would have safe, secure connection. And now you're starting to see the technology move to this, what we call platform as a service, or this cloud native, which this platform is. Cloud native, what makes it unique, you talk about the upgrade. So the old way, host to host took forever. It was, maybe a year to get something deployed or longer. With the SaaS platforms, they'll make upgrades. Typically it's like quarterly that they'll do upgrades. So every quarter you have some upgrades that will come through. But what happens with the cloud native is they can upgrade a lot quicker. And so it could be, hey, a company, just like you pointed out, Ben, a company says, and it can be a large player within the platform. They have a need. They tell the provider, I have this need. The provider can quickly put together something and deploy it. They don't have to wait a quarter to do it. They can do it as soon as it's ready. Once it's been tested and it's ready, they can put it in production. That can happen anytime. And that happens across the board for everybody. So everybody gets to enjoy the value of the upgrade along the way. So I think that's really an important thing to point out when it comes to a cloud-based platform like this.
Our next topic that's warrants discussion is GTreasury integrating with PNC Bank for instant data connectivity. GTreasury has announced that its Clear Connect Gateway Global Bank API connectivity suite has launched instant financial data integrations with PNC Bank. Treasury teams and the Office of the CFO can now use Clear Connect Gateway to access current day balance and transaction reporting and prior day balance and reporting from their organization's PNC Bank accounts. In addition to accessing current day balance and transaction reporting, how else do you think Treasury teams can benefit from GTreasury's Clear Connect Gateway?
That's a good question, Push. Obviously, this is a really good example, I think, of how that API connectivity can benefit kind of the balance reporting and transaction reporting that you mentioned. Obviously, in this case, if you're a treasurer that's got GTreasury and accounts at PNC Bank, you can switch on this functionality as of now, I believe. And they've been quite busy, GTreasury. They've added US Bank and Wells Fargo already this month, on top of the likes of Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs. So pretty much, if you're dealing with a major American bank, they have that connectivity. I think balance reporting is probably the simplest and most common use case for APIs in Treasury. And for treasurers, it should hopefully mean much greater accuracy in balance reporting, enabling greater visibility into cash and more efficiency, as this is an instant service. So it's perhaps another example of automation freeing up time for treasurers that we see in so many areas across Treasury with the overall digitalization agenda that's ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, Ben, this is, another example of what GTreasury continues to do to provide new opportunities for connectivity to be improved along the way. This API connectivity for TMS providers has been picking up steam for a while now. And we're seeing that more and more connectivity via APIs is occurring. And so the stable's starting to broaden. And more corporates are demanding that connectivity be completed via API. It used to be everything was host to host. Well, that costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time. If people had opportunities to connect other than host to host, they started moving to, like Swift File Act or some other route to be able to connect because it was cheaper. It took less time to complete connectivity. And so they started going that route. But what we're finding out now is that the utilization of APIs is making it even better once connectivity is completed. It can actually be a lot quicker for an organization to move to a new TMS platform, connect their banks to it via API connectivity. It can take a lot less time because there's already existing protocols in place, and it's easy for them to pull a lever to get the flow of data and information to occur between their platform and the bank. So this is just another step forward for GTreasury. We're seeing that other TMS providers are taking similar steps for API connectivity. There's obviously still more banks out there for them to engage in this activity with, but they clearly have a platform to do that. So, another good step forward when it comes to connectivity.
And also, just one point to drop in. Obviously, banks have developed their own APIs, and often there can be not a great deal of standardization across all the different institutions. So if the kind of a third-party provider like a TMS technology company can actually sort of get on board and be able to provide the platform that lets corporates seamlessly flick from, one bank to another without having to go through, a series of different screens, having to log onto a different machine to look at the information, anything that can help standardize and bring all of that information together in one place at one time at the touch of a button is hugely important, I think, for treasurers.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, the tier one banks have their stable of APIs. We're seeing some of the super regionals are, bulking up their API stables. The smaller, more localized banks, API connectivity is still not there. There may be some that may be progressive and working their way towards that, but it seems to be with the larger banks at this point that we're seeing the stables either built or being built. But I think over time, there'll be more and more that will start participating in this way of doing things. It kind of has a way over time of filtering its way down into smaller local or more local regionalized, smaller regions. We'll see this just continue to increase across the board.
That's a terrific analysis. Finally, what is your choice for the biggest or the most important story of the past week and why? Paul, can I ask you to go first? And if there's any important takeaway from AFP 2023 held recently in San Diego, California, that you would like to share with our audience, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, Push, I'll start with kind of where things lie in terms of the geopolitical comments that we made earlier. I do see what's going on in the Middle East with Israel's initiative as being something that could spread and cause more pain from a global perspective. So it starts spilling out into other countries. My hope is that it can be more contained. It just depends on the countries surrounding the area and what their reactions are. So if I'm a treasurer, keep an eye on the geopolitical risks is something you should be doing if you're not doing it today, and making sure that you have a plan to mitigate those things that could impact your organization, either from a supply chain standpoint, maybe it's currency, cost of capital, or otherwise. Keep your eye on those kinds of risks and have a plan. AFP 2023, great event in San Diego. Met hundreds of people there. We really had a great showing of people coming to our booth. We had lots of discussion around topics, liquidity management, management of data, staffing, treasury management, platforms or technology discussions, bank structures, you name it. We talked about it at the AFP with a variety of people. We also had several events that we sponsored and put on where we had experts in the field, partners that we have worked with in the past, and great topics that we discussed: managing currency, managing risks, technology, payments, just really good discussions. I think the takeaway from AFP is that there was no lack of focus on upgrading and bringing treasury practices to a current state and prepared for a future state. So I think organizations are out there thinking about things that they should be doing and looking to take steps to improve their efficiencies, their visibility, protect the corporate cash. Lots of discussion around payment security. Payment security, I think, is going to be more and more important, especially when we think about the attacks that the fraudsters are going to execute out there. They're going to continue to evolve, try new tactics to try to steal money from corporate treasurers. So need to stay vigilant when it comes to payment security.
Fantastic to hear about all the various interactions you were able to have with treasurers, you and the team over there, Paul, last week at AFP. I always love going to treasury events. It's great to get a huge amount of treasurers in one space for a period of time. From my side, obviously we've got the Fed interest rate decision later today as we record on the 1st of November, and Bank of England following suit tomorrow after the ECB paused their hiking cycle at the end of last week. But I'd highlight a cost of living crisis story from the UK, where the number of companies going bust this year in the UK is on track to be the highest since the depths of the financial crisis in 2009. Insolvencies rose 10% from a year ago in the 3 months to the end of September, the latest official figures for England and Wales show. And there's also been a sharp rise in the number of firms at risk of going bust. Firms in critical financial distress jumped 25% in the last 3 months. And that is defined as firms that have county court judgments exceeding £5,000 against them, which is very often a precursor for going out of business. So that's just an insight of how the cost of living crisis, it's not gone away. It's particularly in the UK, it's still here, and it's having a significant impact on businesses, particularly as the higher interest rates are hitting working capital. And a lot of these companies that we're talking about aren't very big. You know, they're not multinational corporations that are going out of business, but they are the small businesses that kind of any country relies upon for basically functioning from day to day. So it's a very serious effect and can lead to impacts for those higher up the food chain as well, in terms of suddenly losing suppliers. So yeah, it's a serious situation, and one that kind of needs careful thought, particularly for treasurers at larger organizations, in terms of just kind of shoring up that supply chain and making sure that current suppliers, checking in with them and seeing, you know, what their situation is. Are there kind of financial tools that a larger corporate can use to help a smaller supplier through a particularly rough patch, for example? So yeah, just wanted to bring that up to kind of finish the podcast on a bit of a downer, but just wanted to mention it.
What a riveting conversation. Thank you ever so much, Paul and Ben, for your informative and thought-provoking analysis. We would also like to thank our CTMfile audience for joining us on this edition of Open Treasury. Please subscribe and look in the show notes for the article links. Thank you so much and have a wonderful week. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTMfile or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.